My reactions and understanding of Robert Whitaker's book. Prior to reading The Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, I did not have a clear understanding of mental illness. I did not know how it was caused or the major effects that medicine for mental illness can have on the individual. I also was under the impression that mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, bipolar, and anxiety were mental illnesses that individuals would have to live with for the rest of their life and would not be able to recover from. I also thought that mental illness was caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. After reading Whitaker's book, I found out that the chemical imbalance theory has never been proven to be correct. Before reading the book, I also did not know that many drugs that individuals with mental illness take have many risks and side effects that often outweigh the benefits. I learned that there are numerous studies that show medicine having worse effects on individuals with mental illness. I thought that it was interesting that many studies only observed patients on the medicine over a short period of time due to most of the drugs having bad ending over the long term. I found it to be disturbing that even though studies continuously show the negative effects of the drugs, that practitioners continue to prescribe these drugs to their mentally ill patients. Many studies showed that individuals with mental illness who were not on medicine doing better than those who were on medicine. Some other things that really stood out to me in the book were when Whitaker shared that 2 and 3-year-olds were being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and were being prescribed drugs for it, resulting in many children becoming zombie-like. Also, when he shared that mental illness patients can lose 12 to 20 years of their life from being on medication, and when he states that the effects of Ritalin can be compared to those of cocaine. I found all these facts to be extremely disturbing and unfortunate. The studies throughout the book and Whitaker's statements show that mental illness used to be less prevalent, and now the numbers have continued to skyrocket as years go by, and more medicine continues to be developed and prescribed. After reading The Anatomy of an Epidemic, I am happy to have gained more knowledge on these topics, but at the same time, it is very unfortunate that the facts are so negative. Reading this book has made me want to share this information with individuals throughout society, because I feel like there are many people like myself prior to reading this book that are not aware of the history of mental illness, what truly it entails, and the many effects that medicine has. For the second question, your beliefs about whether mental illness is a brain disorder, explain why you believe what you do. After reading The Anatomy of an Epidemic, I reconsidered my thought process of whether mental illness is a brain disorder. Prior to reading the book, I always thought that mental illness was a brain disorder and was caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. After reading Whitaker's book, I became aware that it has not been proven that mental illness is a brain disorder, and studies throughout the book have shown that medicine can cause a chemical imbalance in the brain. On page 81 in the Whitaker book, Whitaker states that medicine does not fix a chemical imbalance in the brain. Instead, it does the opposite, and prior to being medicated, a depressed person has no known chemical imbalance. A drug called fluoxetine causes a serotonergic pathway to operate abnormally. Throughout the book, studies show that drugs like fluoxetine can cause a chemical imbalance in the brain. The studies also show over and over again that the majority of time individuals with a mental illness who are on the medicine do worse than individuals who have a mental illness and are not on the medicine. On page 140 in the book, a story is told of a patient who had anxiety and was prescribed to an anti-anxiety drug for it. Months after taking the drug, she did not feel right and went to the doctors. The doctor told her that she had a chemical imbalance in her brain and would have to be on medicine for the rest of her life. Next, the doctor stated, if you were diabetic, you would have to take insulin for the rest of your life, wouldn't you? This statement really bothered me when reading the book. I feel that diabetes and mental illness are two completely different things and have different treatments and therefore should not be compared to one another. Throughout the book, Whitaker refers to practitioners comparing mental illness to diabetes and telling patients that they will have to be on this medicine forever and that they will not get better. Even though many practitioners make these statements, patients who have gone off their medicine and have chose other ways to recover, such as exercise, or psychotherapy have the majority of the time done better without the drugs and have made a recovery. As Whitaker states in the book, the benefits of taking a drug for mental illness should outweigh the risks, but unfortunately this is usually not the case. Instead, most medicines that mental illness patients are put on make them feel like emotional zombies, their learning is impaired, and as long as they are taking cocktails of medication, most live in solitude in group homes or go in and out of hospitals. In the article, Mental Disorders Are Not Brain Disorders, the author states that the level at which we identify mental disorders is and should be the person, not the brain. I agree with this statement, and the individual's mental illness should not be identified as only a disorder in their brain because it affects so much more than that, and it is not proven that mental illness is a disorder of the brain. The author of this article, Natalie Banner, goes on to state that even with a complete map of brain functioning and connectivity, there is no underlying account of what is wrong across different brains of people exhibiting similar symptoms. She states that whatever the cause of the condition, whether it is genetic, the product of gene, environment interactions, psychological, social, or spiritual causes, the attribution of disorder applies to thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the person. I completely agree with Natalie Banner's statement that disorder applies to the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the individual, not just their brain. For question number 3, your thoughts about recovery model and how you would use it in your practice. Prior to taking this class and reading Whitaker's book, I was not aware of the recovery model and what it entailed. After learning, reading, and researching the recovery model, I am glad to have gained more knowledge about it because I think it would be very effective when working with a client who has a mental illness. The recovery model looks at the individual as a whole rather than just looking at their mental illness. I think that this is an extremely important aspect of helping the client to have an effective path to recovery. In the article Recovery and Mental Illness, Analysis and Personal Reflections, there's a lot of useful information stated about the recovery model that I found helpful when learning more about it. The article states that 2 key features of the recovery model are the psychosocial perspective on mental illness and its humanistic ideology. Some of the main points the article states about the psychosocial perspective that I agreed with and would like to use when working in the future with mental health clients include when the article states that the client defines their needs and then collaborates with others about their healing process. Next, I thought it was important when the article mentioned that it is important to look at the client's recovery as they are recovering from traumatic experiences in addition to the mental illness itself. I thought it was an important aspect because if the worker only focuses on the mental illness and not the other traumatic experiences that the client is going through, then the recovery will most likely not be as effective. The second key feature is the humanistic ideology. According to the article, the social worker does not look at themselves as an expert when working with the client, but instead they have come up with common goals with the client, and the client holds the keys to their own recovery. I completely agree with both of these approaches when helping a client recover. When working with clients that have a mental illness in the future, I will be sure to refer to the recovery model. Some of the most important aspects of the recovery model that I will use in my practice include not acting like the expert, letting the client hold the key to their recovery, and letting the client make their own decisions about the recovery. According to the NASW website, the recovery model should acknowledge and encourage clients to be involved in the decision-making process. I feel this is extremely important to include in my practice as a social worker because it is my role to help the client help themselves, and it is the client's role to make the decision for themselves. For the fourth question, the impact of stigma and discrimination on people who have a mental health label and identify what you as a social worker can do to change this. The stigma and discrimination of people who have a mental health label is saddening. According to the article Addressing Mental Health Stigma Among Young Adolescents, Evaluation of a Youth-Led Approach, the stigma surrounding a mental illness could prevent adolescents from seeking help for mental and emotional distress, and could leave youth even more isolated, and they experience rejection from their peers. According to the article, cues are how the general public may identify an individual with mental illness. Some of the cues include physical appearance, impaired social skills, and psychiatric symptoms and labels. The article shares some common stereotypes of individuals with mental illness. The idea is that individuals with mental illness are incompetent, weak, or dangerous, and much more. The stigma and discrimination that individuals with mental illness face cause them to have low self-esteem, a decrease in opportunities for social interaction, and reduces their likelihood of seeking care for their mental health problems. I find it very sad that individuals who have a mental illness not only have to live with everyday struggle of having a mental illness, but they also have to face the stigma and discrimination from society because of having the mental illness that they did not choose to have. As a social worker, I would like to change this. I will advocate for individuals with mental illnesses to stop the labeling and discrimination they face daily. I will do this by educating others around me, as well as society as a whole. I think community events held around this topic will create awareness of what individuals face. Also, I think that school educating students more about mental illness and the effects of discrimination would be a step towards reducing the discrimination that individuals face from their peers. But individuals of all ages who have mental illness face this discrimination, so people of all ages need to be informed about this. As a social worker, I will also work with my clients who have a mental illness to help them through discrimination they face and get ideas from them on how to stop it. For the last two questions, how this book and your additional research have influenced your thoughts on mental health and the take-home message from your reading and research. From reading Anatomy of an Epidemic and doing research on these different topics, I have expanded my knowledge of mental health a lot. When first talking about mental illness in class, I really did not know how to define it, and I did not know much about it. I knew different kinds of mental illnesses, but did not know what they entailed and thought that it was impossible to recover from some of the mental illnesses. I'm glad to have been able to expand my knowledge on this topic. I think it is a very important topic in the field of social work. Reading Whitaker's book and doing research helped me learn more about what the different mental illnesses entailed, and I was able to learn about the recovery model. Learning about the recovery model opened my eyes to what I can see being a great method when helping a client with mental illness recover. Overall, I feel that reading this book and doing research on this book was extremely helpful. I am happy to have gained knowledge about the different studies and have been done throughout history on the effects that medications can have on individuals with mental illness. I now realize that many medications have negative effects on patients, and medication is not always the answer. Some of the biggest points I took away after reading this book are that there are many other forms of treatment that can be more beneficial to patients rather than just putting them on medication. Individuals with a mental illness should not be defined by their illness. They do not deserve to be recognized by a label, and there is no proof that their illness is caused by a chemical imbalance in their brain.